just another summer day, spending my free time scrolling through Google Maps to determine where extra platforms and tracks could fit in various right-of-ways. All of a sudden, I saw a small road name that caught my eye, specifically Contrail Street, which naturally I initially read as Conrail Street. Considering the close spelling of these words, I wondered if there were in fact streets that are named after railroads, existing in Fallen Flag alike. After typing in some guesses in Rail Guide, I not only achieved my goal of finding railroad-themed street names, but I also found the nearest railroad located to said streets, as well as the reasoning behind their naming. Although, there have to be some exceptions. Railroads that describe a single location such as Burlington, Milwaukee, Santa Fe, and Lehigh Valley are not included, due to being too vague and with said road names not likely being named after said railroad. On the other hand, general railroading terms such as railroad itself will not be counted either, since railroad has been used in countless street names across the country to indicate where a station is, whether the town still has rail service today or not. Similarly, many railroad yards have small roads that are named after the owner of said railroad, including multiple CSX drives at their yards in Cumberland, Maryland, Dante, Virginia, Hamlet, North Carolina, Nashville, Tennessee, as well as the CSX drive to the railroad's headquarters in Jacksonville, Florida. Similarly, a CSX road in Pikeville and Langley, Kentucky, a grade crossing in Chatsworth, Georgia, a parallel road to a main line from Hancock to Orleans Crossroads, West Virginia, and a shorter parallel road in Stratshouse, Virginia. Also of interest is Norfolk Southern Drive in their Birmingham, Alabama yard, and Norfolk Southern Lane outside of their Newark, Delaware yard. Another Class 1 who named street names after themselves in their yards is Union Pacific, with Union Pacific Avenue being found at their Cheyenne Roundhouse, and Union Pacific Avenue and Union Pacific Road in Yermo, California, East Los Angeles, Union Pacific Boulevard and Industrial Park in Laredo, Texas, Union Pacific Drive in Onaga, Kansas, and Union Pacific Street in Gering, Nebraska. Likewise, there are roads named after Class 1s outside of the yards, starting with Amtrak Boulevard that leads right to the McGregor, Texas station served by the Texas Eagle, Via Rail Driveway outside of their Ingersoll, Ontario station served by their corridor service, Canadian Pacific Avenue in Desperatz, Ontario, not too far away from the XCP now Huron Central branch of Sault Ste. Marie to Sudbury, CSX Drive along abandoned trackage in Whitesburg, Kentucky, likely a recent abandoned coal mine branch, Union Pacific Court in Alvarado, California, near abandoned Sacramento Northern right-of-ways, Union Pacific Street in Missoula, Montana, which is closer to Montana Rail Link trackage rather than UP, Union Pacific Drive in Plant City, Florida, near a CSX branch line, Union Pacific Street in Pahrump, Nevada, which is unusually near literally no rail connections whatsoever, and Union Pacific Trail in Park City, Utah, not too far away from an abandoned UP branch line to Echo, as there's also Central Pacific Trail and Promontory Summit Drive, thus foreshadowing the railroad-themed communities later in the video, where every street in the general area is named after a railroad. Our first fallen flag in alphabetical order that qualifies for this video is the mighty Burlington Northern, comprising of the Burlington, Great Northern, and Northern Pacific Railroads, which is well represented by our first entry of Burlington Northern Drive in Watertown, South Dakota, which serves an industrial park adjacent to a Great Northern branch line from Minnesota to South Dakota. Also from BN is a 3-in-1 near Mandan, North Dakota yard, including E&W Burlington Northern Drive along with BN Service Road along the former Northern Pacific Main Line, and lastly Burlington Northern Street in Hannibal, Missouri, that now parallels a now abandoned Burlington route connection, Palmy Road. Next in the fallen flag list is one of the first railroads in America, the Baltimore and Ohio, or in this case, abbreviated to B&O, starting off with B&O Avenue, which surrounds the present-day Frederick, Maryland station served by MARC. Next is B&O Boulevard in Penshurst, West Virginia, which is near an abandoned Monongahela branch instead of B&O. Then B&O Drive in Shippensville, Pennsylvania, which is appropriately located next to an abandoned B&O branch to Clarion on the other side of the river. Then B&O Road in Abingdon, Maryland, adjacent to their Royal Blue Main Line to Jersey City, now owned by CSX. And then B&O Road on the opposite side of the country near a former Great Northern branch line in Okanogan, Washington. Further down the list is the Burlington route, represented by CB&Q Street, appropriately next to a former Burlington route siting near Des Moines, Iowa. Then the Central Georgia Avenue parallel to their main line in Millen, Georgia, and Great Western Avenue adjacent to the now abandoned Chicago Great Western Main Line in Glen Ellen, Illinois. The next applicable railroad down the list is Conrail, which technically still exists today, but as a paper railroad jointly operated by CSX and Norfolk Southern, yet traces of its time as a recent Class 1 can still be found. One such example is Conrail Access Road in Mount Union, Pennsylvania, adjacent to the former Pennsylvania now Norfolk Southern Main Line, Conrail Road that crosses the ex-New York Central now CSX Main Line in St. Johnsville, New York, and Conrail Road which accesses the ex-Pennsylvania now CSX Extremont Yard in Fairmont City, Illinois, just outside of St. Louis. Outside the yards is Conrail Road, which parallels the former Conrail now Delmar Valley Central Main Line near a grain plant in Seaford, Delaware, and Conrail Road in Leechburg, Pennsylvania, that's right next to a junction between the NS Bypass and the Kiski Junction Railroad, the latter of which serving part of a Pennsy secondary that went to Erie and Buffalo. Our next recent fallen flag that also happens to be blue in the Northeast is a Delaware and Hudson, represented by Delaware and Hudson Drive in Cutterbackville, New York, located near a now abandoned New York Ontario Western branch line, D&H Avenue at Riverside, Pennsylvania, near an ex-Pennsy now NS branch line, D&H Court near another ex-Pennsy now NS branch in Montauban, Pennsylvania, and we also have the intersection of Delaware and Hudson Road with D&H Road at Vermontville, New York, as the road with the longer name was sadly paved on top of the former D&H Lake Placid branch. Also of interest is DNRG Drive near the abandoned Rio Grande Southern Road in Durango, Colorado, not too far away from the Durango and Silverton Heritage Railway. Skipping down the list is GM&O Road in Sandusky, Illinois, on the former Gulf Mobile and Ohio Main Line, Grand Trunk Western Driveway at their former yard and main line in Port Huron, Michigan, Illinois Central Road outside their ex-IC now Canadian National Yard at Geismar, Louisiana, Illinois Central Avenue adjacent to a now abandoned IC branch line in Boyle, Mississippi, and Illinois Central Road in a small community in Gilbertsville, Kentucky, that is somewhat close to a former IC branch a few miles away. Throughout my research, the railroad with supposedly the most street names directly based on it would be the Louisville and Nashville, or L&N. I give this title to the L&N since, despite the somewhat vague naming, most of these streets are in fact near former L&N trackage, starting off with L&N Avenue in Muscota, Illinois, along with their partially abandoned St. Louis branch, L&N Avenue in Pennington Gap, Kentucky, near present-day CSX Coal Mine branch, L&N Avenue along the L&N Main Line in Lewisburg, Tennessee, L&N Court further up the main line in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, L&N Circle at Theodore, Alabama on the southern end of their main line, L&N Drive also next to CSX Drive along the abandoned branch line near Whitesburg, Kentucky again, L&N Drive along the inactive segment of the same branch in Hazard, Kentucky, a very short L&N Drive in Siler, Kentucky, located further away from another branch line, L&N Drive located just outside the former L&N station in Etowah, Tennessee along the Atlanta main line, L&N Drive southwest adjacent to a Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis branch line in Piedmont, Alabama, L&N Road in Lincolnton, Georgia that's oddly not located near any L&N trackage, L&N Lane in Munford, Alabama near the semi-abandoned Gadsden branch, L&N Road in Milan, Tennessee, more appropriately found next to the L&N Memphis branch, L&N Road, Old L&N Road, and L&N Street all next to each other further down the Memphis branch in Mason, Kentucky, another L&N Street, likely where the former Galloway, Tennessee station used to be further down the same branch, L&N Street further from where the Paris, Tennessee station would have been further north along the same branch, L&N Street in Sylacauga, Alabama, adjacent to a smaller L&N branch line now owned by the Eastern Alabama Railroad, and lastly, L&N Street in Mount Vernon, Indiana, that crosses their St. Louis branch now owned by the Evansville Western Railroad. All of this adds up to a grand total of 20 L&N named roads, almost all of which being located practically right next to Louisville and Nashville trackage. Not as extensive as the L&N, but just as frequent is the Missouri Pacific, or MOPAC, starting with Missouri Pacific Avenue, which is interestingly adjacent to a C-train road in Belchassi, Louisiana, near New Orleans and Gulf Coast trackage, Missouri Pacific Street in Hoisington, Kansas, near the former MOPAC main line, now owned by the Kansas and Oklahoma Railroad, MOPAC Avenue, likely where the former Olean, Missouri station used to be for the railroad's Lakeland branch, MOPAC Drive, likely where the former Higginsville, Missouri station further up the same branch, MOPAC Drive adjacent to their mainline terminus in San Antonio, Texas, now owned by Union Pacific, MOPAC Road adjacent to the abandoned Cairo branch in Thebes, Illinois, MOPAC Road adjacent to their Joplin branch in Harrisonville, Missouri, MOPAC Road on top of the abandoned MOPAC branch to Beebe Junction, Arkansas, between Brinkley and Monroe, Arkansas, MOPAC Road adjacent to a secondary not too far away from the Longview, Texas station, MOPAC Road adjacent to the former Texas and Pacific, later MOPAC Fort Worth, Texas yard, and MOPAC Street just outside of their Houston branch in Wills, Texas, all adding up to a total of 11 Missouri Pacific themed roads. Another Pacific themed road with a lot of street names in its honor is the Northern Pacific, including North Pacific Avenue just outside their Fargo, North Dakota depot, North Pacific Avenue not too far away from their former Mapleton, North Dakota station on their main line, North Pacific Avenue NE at the end of their abandoned Esmond, North Dakota branch in its namesake town, North Pacific Avenue E in Hale, North Dakota next to the abandoned Mott branch, E Northern Pacific Avenue along their former main line near their Belgrade, Montana depot, North Pacific Road in Yelm, Washington along the secondary, and Northern Pacific Road through the NP's main locomotive shops in Brainerd, Minnesota, thus adding to a total of a lower 7 roads named in its honor. Moving along is Norfolk and Western Avenue outside of Cloverdale, Virginia Yards, Norfolk and Western Street along their main line in Windsor, Virginia, and various roads simply named Norfolk and Western Railway in Oak Hill, West Virginia, Matoka, Virginia, Fayetteville, West Virginia, and Welch, West Virginia, most of which being near former Virginian trackage due to the N&W acquiring the Virginia in 1959. Further up north is New York Central Avenue near their abandoned Ottawa branch in Russell, Ontario, New York Central Road adjacent to its main line in Port Byron, New York, Penn Central Court just above Union Pacific Court in Rio Linda, California, Penn Central Lane in Spring Mills, Pennsylvania, likely along an abandoned Pennsylvania coal branch, and Penn Central Street with a cul-de-sac directly where the right-of-way to Grand Rapids used to be in Durham, Michigan. Closer towards the end of the list, we have Pere Marquette Drive in Grand Blanc, Michigan, close to the road's Saginaw main line, Pere Marquette Drive along their main line in Lansing, Michigan, Pere Marquette Drive and Golf Course in Canadian Lakes, Michigan, close to a few of their abandoned branch lines, Pere Marquette Street near the Ann Arbor main line but not too far from the PM main in Howell, Michigan, Pere Marquette Street at the former site of the Elbow, Michigan station, Pere Marquette Street next to their former Petoskey branch in Alden, Michigan, and Pere Marquette Street in South Lawrence, Massachusetts, near ex-Boston and Maine, now MBTA trackage. We also have RF&P Drive connecting to RF&P Park in Glen Allen, Virginia, adjacent to the former Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac main line, and Seaboard Coastline Drive outside the Savannah's Georgia station along the SCL. Soon Line is our next road on the list, with multiple street names, starting with Soon Line Avenue at the side of their former Albany, Minnesota station, Soon Line Drive at the side of the former Gordon, Wisconsin station, Soon Line Drive near an abandoned Chicago Great Western branch in Waterloo, Iowa, Soon Line Drive adjacent to their former Winnipeg branch in Henning, Minnesota, Soon Line Drive outside of their Bismarck, North Dakota branch in its namesake city, Soon Line Road crossing a connecting line in Boundville, Wisconsin, Soon Line Road in Rhinelander, Wisconsin adjacent to its Minneapolis Sault Ste. Marie main line, Soon Line Road next to Southern Pacific Road in Glover, Wisconsin near an abandoned CNW branch, Soon Line Road at the side of the former Kettle River, Minnesota station, Soon Line Road in Leonard, Minnesota near Duluth Cutoff branch, and Soon Line Road at the site of the former Drake, Minnesota station, bringing the total to 11 roads named after Soon Line. Wrapping up the individual Class 1s is the mighty Southern Pacific, starting with Southern Pacific Boulevard adjacent to the Lordsburg, New Mexico station, currently seeing Amtrak Sunset Limited service, Southern Pacific Drive in Tiburon, New Mexico, somewhat close to the SB's Golden State main line to Chicago, Southern Pacific Drive adjacent to their Long Beach, California yard, Southern Pacific Drive in Tornillo, Texas near their Sunset route to New Orleans, Southern Pacific Road near Northern Alberta Railway trackage in Fort McMurray, Alberta, Southern Pacific Road adjacent to part of the Cajon Pass in Pelham, California, Southern Pacific Road adjacent to their Port Arthur branch in Beaumont, Texas, and Southern Pacific Road adjacent to their Sunset route near Van Horn, Texas. Lastly is Western Pacific Way along a former SB branch in Tracy, California, and it's only right that the last individual road, Western Pacific Way, brings us to their namesake Railroad Museum in Portola, California. Now, through my searches, I've noticed that there were a handful of communities with various railroad names all connected to each other in a single development. This is no accident, as a handful of housing developments throughout the country name parts or all of the development after railroad themes, especially railroad names. Starting off this creative list is Byron Center, Michigan, located next to an abandoned New York Central ranch in Grand Rapids, as right next to Railside Golf Club is Byron Depot Drive, connected to Amtrak Drive, Conrail Drive, and Lionel Drive, with Whistlevale Drive off to the northeast of the golf course. Next is a smaller community, including representation for Conrail, Burlington, and the Durango and Silverton in Horn Lake, Mississippi, near an Illinois Central secondary. Then another set of houses representing the Sioux Line, Ann Arbor, Reading, and Transcontinental Railroad in Monument, Colorado, near the BNSF Front Range line. Then a small set of streets near the former Illinois Central Indianapolis branch in Glens Valley, Indiana, representing Missouri Pacific, Chesty System, Gulf Mobile in Ohio, Gandy Dancers, the Burlington Zephyr, and the Milwaukee Road. Another small assortment of houses in Decker Prairie, Texas, near Burlington and Rock Island trackage representing Missouri Pacific, Burlington Route, Santa Fe, Baltimore, and Ohio. Woodland Station in Jacksonville, Florida, representing Union Pacific, Santa Fe, and Grand Central Station. Possibly recent railroad-themed development representing the Soo Line, Union Pacific, Wabash Cannonball, Topeka, Kansas, and Lionel with great transit accessibility to the Metro Graves Lake, Illinois station, served by the Milwaukee District North Line. A housing development near the Fillmore and Western Tourist Railroad in Fillmore, California, representing the Union Pacific, Southern Pacific, Santa Fe, Burlington Route, and Orient Express. Park South Station, not too far away from Charlotte, North Carolina's Archdale Station, representing the Union Pacific, Central Pacific, the Royal Gorge Route, Nelson Rockefeller, the Portland Rose, the Katy Flyer, the Diplomat, and the elusively named Milwaukee Road. And last but not least, a few rows of houses in Las Vegas, Nevada, with streets named after some of the most iconic railroads in pop culture, including Amtrak Avenue, Union Pacific Avenue, Ice Train Avenue, Starlight Express Avenue, Euro Rail Street, Eurostar Street, Silver Street, and most impressively, Central Railroad Court, Baltimore and Ohio Court, Polar Express Court, and Crazy Train Court. Yes, there is in fact a road named after the Polar Express, in addition to many other pop culture train names, all in this unsuspecting row of houses in none other than Las Vegas. It's a bizarre yet unique way to show that if a railroad existed in the US, it more than likely had a few streets named after it as well, as a way to keep its legacy alive and well in the most unsuspecting places.